When it comes to the Star Wars prequels, I have always been in the camp of someone who liked them. As a kid, I grew up with the original trilogy through my father, and when the prequel films came out, I was very excited. Episode 1 had its fair share of flaws. Fun action with easily one of the best lightsaber battles, and some really great new music by John Williams. Episode 2 had an interesting story setup with Obi-Wan off on an enjoyable mystery, which involved Jango Fett, and a romance storyline going on at the same time between Anakin and Padme. That lacked chemistry among other things. I really enjoyed the finale, seeing the clone troopers and Jedi in action. Again, I had issues with episode 2, but overall, I enjoyed it. Episode 3 felt like the movie that George Lucas always wanted to make from the start. The story was more interesting and emotionally charged. Anakin and Obi-Wan had good chemistry. The action is really good in this one, and I only have a few issues with it. I find Revenge of the Sith to easily be one of the best Star Wars films, and with this new trilogy of films meant that there would be games associated with them. Many of the prequel games have aged really well, and explored and expanded upon aspects from the films. For example, Episode 1 Racer is a great arcade racer that perfectly captures the speed and danger from one of those races. Bounty Hunter provided an original story developing Jango Fett and why he was selected for the Clone Project. The Clone Wars acted as a way for players to experience the battle on Geonosis, along with acting as a bridge between Episode 2 and 3. There were many more as well that did a great job of delivering memorable Star Wars games. At the same time, there were a few games that very much lived up to the reputation of some movie games, where they felt like lazy and poorly executed projects. The Game Boy Advance saw some of the worst Star Wars games I have honestly ever played, and one of them was a game based on the Episode 2 film. The movie has a lot to work with to create some fun action, from shootouts, lightsaber battles, and a one-on-one space battle. But this game managed to capture none of the magic from the film. Episode 2, the game, is an insult to the film and the fans. Right from the start of the game, Episode 2 does not present itself with any confidence. The first stage is a side-scrolling level that is easily one of the most boring levels, period. It consists of walking to the right, being forced to stop to engage in lackluster combat. Episode 2 does not land any of its elements. Most of what it tries, it fails at, and to its credit, the vehicle sequences are at least a bit more fun than the side-scrolling gameplay, but they are a mess to look at, and they are only a little bit better than most of the other levels. There was a lot you could do with this game, and I felt like it was made by people that did not care about the property. A good example is the Episode 1 game. While it is heavily flawed, there were many interesting elements that showed me that they actually cared about what they were making, and just needed more time to refine and better them. Episode 2 is just lazy. Episode 2 is split up into side-scrolling stages and vehicle-based ones. Let's start out with the side-scrolling stages. Most of these levels consist of you starting on the left and just continually moving to the right, with some short stops for combat. I do think a design like this could have worked, but there needed to be something added to it to keep the player interested. Walking to the right for most of the stages makes the entire game feel like it honestly should just play itself, since there isn't much interacting that you need to do in many cases. As a counter to this, I do think providing some engaging platforming, and maybe even some light exploration with multiple rooms, could have made it more interesting. And oddly enough, there is some of this in the game, but what little jumping is here is awful due to the character's movement being very stiff and imprecise. Essentially, it feels like the platforming was shoved into a game not built for it. And there is a stage on Kamino where you go into multiple rooms, but again, since the minute-to-minute gameplay is awful and boring, it becomes a slog. The combat in these stages is all focused on the lightsaber. This also does not feel playtested, since since it's very cumbersome to even attack. You need to hold down the attack button and then select the direction that you want to attack in. So you are forced to stand still and swipe left and right or up and down. It makes using the lightsaber very awkward, not empowering like it should be. You can jump for some of the platforming along with trying to perform a jump kick that has awful hit detection, and most of the time I couldn't even get it to land. There are two force powers that you can use. You can use your energy to jump really high and force push enemies. The force push instantly kills most things on the screen. Now, to the game's credit, the sound effects for the combat are pretty good, but most of them are pulled from the film. The impact to your hits is almost non-existent as there's no weight to them. The bulk of the game is centered on the combat, and it starts off bad and stays that way throughout the entire game. The levels all feature areas from the film. You start out on Coruscant as the first level, which does a good job of putting you to sleep. Then you take to the streets to fight Zam, and here it is a bit cheap since she can shoot you quickly, and since the movement and actions are so clunky, it can be hard to react properly to dodge her shots. Kamino does offer some more interesting design, with rooms to explore and what could have been a breath of fresh air turns into a slow search to get out of the level. Later, Anakin will fight his way through a Tusken Raider camp, and here it features a cheap dog-like enemy which will be spammed at you. These guys are hard to hit and come at you in groups of threes. They feel like cheap ways to take away your health. Following this is a level on Geonosis that requires you to do a lot of jumping, and it is here where you realize how awful the platforming is. It will look like you can land on a platform, but you will fall right through it. The game does not provide the right amount of visual information to the player, which means jumping is just an exercise in frustration. Then you need to fight your way through a conveyor belt, and it is full of instant death parts. What makes this really cheap is that since you need to stand still to attack enemies, it means you are very slow to move out of the way from getting smashed. So you either take needless damage from enemies, or just outright die. For one level you get to play as Mace Windu, and then the game concludes with you fighting Dooku. At no point does the combat evolve or get any better. Episode 2 is at least consistent, and stays awful the whole way through. Outside of the side-scrolling stages are 3 vehicle levels. The first one sees you commanding a speeder as you race to chase Zam. You need to dodge other speeders and obstacles. In the speeder, you can collect items to give you a shield. The second level has you piloting a Jedi starfighter as you shoot at Jango Fett and asteroids. And the last level has you in a clone gunship chasing Dooku. These vehicle levels are a bit more fun, but they need more work like the rest of the game. My biggest issue with them is that they are a mess to look at. Episode 2 is just a game made up of only flaws. You play as 3 different Jedi and they all feel the same to play, with nothing unique about them. One easy thing would have been to give each Jedi a unique power to use. The side-scrolling levels have a lack of checkpoints. If you die, then you need to repeat the entire thing over again. Combat is clunky and not fun. The platforming is worse as you never really know if you're going to land on a platform or if you're going to fall to your death. There's even a laziness found in some of the death animations. For example, when you kill a bantha, they just disappear. This game is awful and does nothing interesting with all of the material provided from the film. While I enjoyed episode 2 the film, the GBA game is awful. There is nothing redeeming here. Everything from the level design to the gameplay and even the vehicle sequences all suck. This is a great example of a game that was never playtested, or at least feels like that. This is honestly a shame because episode 2 has plenty of parts that could lend themselves to fun games. You have games that expanded upon the movie's story like Bounty Hunter, but even a simple brawler featuring Obi-Wan and Anakin could have worked really well, especially since there would be one based on episode 3 that would go on to be really good. The prequel era of games is full of many great ones, but this one I would suggest that everyone skip. I do not recommend episode 2 on the GBA. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you'd like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.